Hello and welcome to NDTV Profit. We are coming live from the JP Morgan's India Investor Summit, and with me is Amyn Pirani, who is the head auto research at JP Morgan. Amyn, thank you very much for joining us on on this investor summit. My first question to you is this: the auto sector has been doing good, for the last 2 years. We've seen good run up for PVs. What is the kind of runway that you see for the private passenger vehicle?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So as far as passenger vehicles is concerned, I think what we need to remember is that unlike a lot of other categories, compared to pre-COVID levels, passenger vehicles have actually been already 20% higher. So, from that point of view, we need to remember that a kind of moderation was already expected. The industry body had already talked about a low to mid single digit growth for this year because of the high base. Even companies had talked about that. And we are seeing that, in the first few months, wholesale and retail numbers, that there is a moderation in growth. The festive season seems to have started okay. Obviously, at this time of the year, companies do increase their inventories because they're expecting a strong festive. There's some timing issue also because of the inauspicious days being in September rather than October. So I think by the end of this year, I think like the industry body said, it could be a low to mid single digit growth here. But from a 2 to 3 year perspective, I think given the low penetration, the rising incomes, and the kind of model launch cycle, which again will start next year, I think we should be in a healthy growth phase going forward.
Do you see a slew of launches coming up in the next 6 months, 2 years, which will push sales across for the industry?
So next year we already know about a lot of EV launches coming in. So in India right now, EV penetration is still at only 2%. Part of the reason is that there are not enough vehicles out there. But next year we have already heard almost every company launching 2 to 3 new EVs. We have heard announcements. Some models may come in the first quarter of the next calendar year, but during the year we'll have a lot of EV launches. So that will create a lot of excitement. And at the same time, we will also see quite a few refreshes and new ICE launches next year as well. So 22 and 23, we had a lot of launches. 24, the momentum is relatively slower. I think 25, the momentum could increase, and that could create demand excitement as well.
I think largely the next question on two-wheelers specifically, because you mentioned about passenger vehicles, but two-wheelers have had a very stellar this year as well as continuing the trend from the previous year.
Yeah.
But within players, we've also seen different segments outperforming for each player that they operate in, whether it's scooters for a player or it's the premium motorcycles for some others. While 125 has become a new category that's been created. Specifically, what's your outlook for the two-wheeler industry and the players within, because we are seeing a lot of divergent trends of outperformance and growth, but how do you see the year panning out for them?
Sure. So two-wheelers, again to put in perspective, unlike passenger vehicles, two-wheelers are still below pre-COVID levels.
Yes.
Because the recovery started a bit late. And hence, you are right, last year and even this year, the recovery is continuing. And I think that given that we are still below pre-COVID levels, this momentum can continue in the second half and even into the next year. You are right that different players are, performing differently because categories are behaving differently. But that we have seen in passenger vehicles as well. SUVs have done much better, and companies which are more leveraged towards SUVs have seen market share gains. In the two-wheeler space, we've seen electrification being a trend. It has moderated a bit, but it has, gone from 0 to 6-7% of volumes. Scooterization is a long-term trend which continues, and I think that is something which could continue to be the case. Within motorcycles, entry-level 100cc motorcycles are not doing that well, but the 125cc is doing quite well. So I think, so two things will play out. The companies which are already strong in these categories will obviously have an advantage, but we are also seeing examples wherein almost all the companies are coming out of their comfort zone and launching a lot of vehicles in segments where they are not traditionally been strong. So I think market shares will move, but in general, I think we will see all companies trying to capture more and more categories than they were doing in the past.
So do you see, when you say that we have not seen the numbers cross the pre-COVID levels, Are you seeing cannibalization of electric vehicles also coming into this category, because we now have a slew of two-wheeler electric EVs which are
Sure.
in the market? So
Yeah.
do you see that we may not cross two-wheeler ICE pre-COVID ICE numbers, but on the whole EV together we may cross at some point in time?
Sure. So actually, when I was making that comment, I was actually adding EVs. So even with EVs, at least the registered EVs, I'm leaving the low-speed EVs which don't get registered and for which the data is very patchy. Even if I add EVs, we are still below pre-COVID levels. So as a whole, we need to first cross pre-COVID levels. And then the question comes in that whether ICE on its own can go back to pre-COVID levels or not. I think the interesting thing is that while EVs have done well, and most EVs are scooters at this stage, we haven't really seen a slowdown in ICE scooters. So ICE scooters are still growing along with EV scooters. The categories which have not grown is entry-level motorcycles and mopeds. But we have to wait and see. Maybe those categories also catch up at some point of time. So I don't think at this stage there is cannibalization. It's just a new use case which is getting created. And together ICE plus EV is still growing.
So is 125 the new base level, and the EVs are taking up the space which 100 cc's were taking because of the price point?
Maybe to some extent, because even within EVs, we need to remember we have price points of 70,000, 90,000, and even more than 100,000.
Yeah.
Until recently, the price points were even higher, right? So maybe to some extent that is happening. But all I would say is that it's too early to try and second guess, the customer behavior, because we've seen in the global examples. A few years back, we thought that EV penetration will grow much higher. But after reaching 14-15% numbers in Europe, it has stagnated. In the US, it has stagnated at a much lower percentage penetration. So I think it is use case by use case. At the end of the day, when a customer is looking at any product, ICE or EV, they're definitely looking at total cost of operations, or ownership rather, and they're looking at the features and the attractiveness and the price point. So I think it's a combination of things, and it's just a new use case which EV has gotten.
I think just one question which you said, that ICE scooters are also performing well, the petrol, diesel, while EVs are also growing. So are you seeing that, is this a category getting created again, that there are newer customers that are buying ICE scooters as well and then seeing the other options with EV? Because we've seen pricing for ICE scooters which are launched now in the 110 is quite similar to EVs.
Correct.
So is this that newer customers are buying the scooters, which is a trend we saw in the 2010s when multiple players had really good launches in the 110cc when they had the Eureka moment. So do you see that it's a newer category, or is it cannibalization from some other category that's coming in?
So see, one of our views is that over the next, say, 5-10 years, scooterization should continue to increase. Like you said, we have seen this trend from the 2010s, and this will continue. Obviously, a part of it will be taken over by EV scooters, and EVs are mostly scooters, at least at this stage. But ICE scooters will also continue to grow, and the reasons for that, is basically, very straightforward. As you get better roads in semi-urban areas, scooter is something which most people in the family can use. It's a family vehicle. As we get more and more female labor force participation, scooter sales go up. So scooter as a percentage of two-wheeler should continue to go up. Some of it will be ICE, because a lot of first-time buyers may not be comfortable owning an EV. Some of them will be. Some of them may want to buy a lower-end EV because they have a lot of running and that helps them. But there is going to be demand at every CC and every price point of EV for the scooters. And yes, maybe to some extent, an entry-level motorcycle or a moped, or in some cases even a 125cc motorcycle is competition for the high-performance EVs that we also have in the market.
There's one theme which some of the auto companies are playing, which is you get the solar at home. We're not talking about the cities, because cities have buildings, but beyond the cities, you get them home, and then you see the penetration of EVs really taking off, because your cost of operation comes down significantly. Do you see that to be a big game changer? Because now the government is also pushing for solarization.
So I would say that specifically from the point of view of owning an EV two-wheeler, I'm sure it will help, but I don't think it is the main reason stopping people from owning an EV. I think there are other aspects. Like initially when EVs came, people were not sure what will happen to the battery after 3-4 years. Now we have seen a lot of companies increase the warranty on the batteries. Some people have made it 4 years, 5 years, 8 years in some instance to give customers some confidence. Then the second issue was that service centers and service availability, and that is being addressed.
That's coming in.
Yes. So financing becoming so I think access to electricity is one of the challenges, which is charging infra, but it is not the only thing. In fact, one of the other things which may stop some people from owning an EV today is the resale value, because right now prices have come down so quickly that you do not know what the resale value of your vehicle is 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And in India, whether you are a car customer or a two-wheeler customer, you are always thinking of value, and you want a resale value so that 4 years, 5 years down the line, when you want to upgrade, that vehicle can serve as your down payment and the rest can be your financing.
So, the question is that, the reason why we used to look at resale value is the kind of, mileage or other stuff we were able to get. But now you have batteries which have higher ranges,
right,
which comes in. Does it really play out in that sense?
It can, but it also depends on what is your running. If your running is 70, 80 kilometers in a day, then yes, it does make a lot of sense, because then the resale value is not as important for you 4 years down the line. But if your running is only 30 kilometers, you are not actually using the mileage or the range to the fullest extent, and hence the resale value is still very important, because in 5 years you may not do so many kilometers so as to fully recover in running costs.
So specifically, one trend that we saw after the first quarter was rural outperforming the urban market for a couple of players. Now,
yes,
that is the first, I think, in the last 3 to 4 years where urban has been outperforming because of various reasons,
right,
after effects of pandemic being one of them.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that as a start of a trend that will be beneficial, of course, to the two-wheelers?
Mm-hmm.
But does that also have a play for the entry-level cars finally, that there is some recovery that you might see? If not this year, it is a start. What is the indication that you might see as one of the things to watch out for?
So I think, while there is merit in comparing the two situations, in our view, the two situations are not actually the same. So there are two aspects here. A, two-wheelers were still below pre-COVID levels. So there was a recovery which was supposed to happen at some point of time. Then within that, like you said, rural was even lower than pre-COVID than urban. So rural had to start catching up at some point of time. And then the catching up is happening, A, because personal incomes are getting better, good monsoon always helps, financing penetration has been increasing in two-wheelers, both urban and rural. Now, as far as entry-level cars are concerned, I think the issues are slightly different in our view. Is that A, because of emission norms, as vehicle prices have gone up across the board, customers are thinking whether they should buy a second-hand vehicle and level up, or wait for 1 or 2 years extra and buy, say, a slightly more expensive vehicle, because we have not seen a lot of new model introductions in the entry car space. In fact, quite a few companies have discontinued their models in that space. Whereas if you see SUVs, even subcompact SUVs, we've seen a slew of launches. So model excitement is relatively lower. Prices are still high compared to where they were. Used car market with the improved availability of vehicles as well as improved finance availability there as well has become a more and more attractive area. So I think entry-level cars, for me, the recovery is dependent on new exciting launches happening, which basically excite the customer and make it aspirational again.
Do you see a space there for EV to come and take that space?
Maybe, but
you have a sub 5 lakh car which has come in, right? In that sense.
Yes. But again, see, whether it's EV, whether it's petrol, or whether it's hybrid, I think at the end of the day, you need a new product, and not just one new product. You need the larger guys to also launch new products there to get the excitement back. Because if you look at SUVs also, SUVs did not start taking off just because 1 or 2 launches happened. initially we had 1 or 2 launches, and then everybody started launching. We started having 5 to 6 launches every year across the board, and that is where the inflection point happened.
But also in SUV's case, the price points also came down a bit, right? From
Absolutely.
The highest high 30s to between
Absolutely.
15 to 20.
Absolutely. Even right now we have SUVs below 10 lakhs as well, because
yes.
the companies have launched that form factor.
Yeah.
And it is not so much to do with powertrain. It's to do with new features, new kind of shapes, new kind of use cases, and just the attractiveness of the category coming back. I mean, sedans have not done well in India at all.
Yeah.
Right.
So essentially, if someone would want to buy a 5-6 lakh car, they would want to wait or go towards the compact SUV market, which started because of 6 lakh rupee launches, which is so they are seeing the value there now, which is slightly higher, and they are okay to wait. Is that your interpretation?
That is what the data seems to suggest.
And used car market is the second that you're seeing as well. So just changing a tide a bit and going towards tractors, because that's also been one of the segments which has been very interesting. There's been one company that's been growing over the last 4-5 months, and the other one, since it's a 2-player market, has been falling on the sidelines. Now we've seen some change in that in the last 1 month's data, but it's too short. But because of good monsoons, do you see recovery penciling in the second half in a meaningful way? And if you could talk to us a little bit on regions as well, because the market leader is operational in the western part of India, and that's been doing very well. So how are you seeing these both divergent trends being meeting eventually for this year, and do you see a very higher recovery in the second half as well?
Sure. So tractors again, is a cyclical business, but the cyclicality is not like minus 20% and plus 20%. So in that context, if you look at the data, last year was a 7-8% decline in the industry. On that base, most companies gave a guidance of a 5% growth for this year. And it was very likely that the growth will be more visible in the second half, because that is when the base started to get more favorable. And in the first half, or rather till August, we've not seen great numbers, which was again very well anticipated. As far as different regions and different players are concerned, actually it is a 5-6 player market, but only 2 companies are listed. But if you look across the board, some companies have gained, some companies have lost. But in general, if I look at the last 15-20 years of data, market share changes are more driven by regional disparities than by companies structurally gaining market share. So market shares over a longer period of time have remained in a very tight band, because in every local region, the market is a duopoly, which doesn't change a lot. So you're right, the Western market has done well, but we've had slightly better, well spread out rains this year. So maybe the northern markets also do well as we get into the festive season, because the northern market is also more driven by festive sentiment. And if that happens, then we will see, again, market share changes happening between different players. And like I said, I think locally market shares are not changing materially. But as different regions do better or worse, somebody who's strong in north may show a market share gain in the second half, if that were to happen. And if somebody is strong in western and south, or say east, and if those regions start to do better, that player or those players could see a market share improvement.
We have, I think, time for one more question.
Sure.
And the last segment which is left is the commercial vehicles.
Sure.
How do you see that segment panning out? And we've seen of late, EV buses also, coming into play.
Yeah.
How do you see that segment growing?
Also the electric LCV, if you can also address in this.
Sure. So if I quickly talk about the commercial vehicle, the truck aspect. So again, historically we've seen, whenever we've seen a cyclical recovery, we've seen that a new peak in volumes is normally 15 to 30% higher than the previous peak. Right now in fiscal 24, as far as trucks are concerned, we were just about back to the previous peak, which was fiscal year 19. So from that point of view, assuming India GDP growth continues to be quite healthy, we should see some more growth before peaking out. But what has also happened in the meantime is that through BS6 and BS6 phase 2, we've seen prices increase by a great margin. We have also seen some more pricing discipline coming into the industry by the top 2 players in the last 1 year, which has meant that the smaller truck operators are moving more and more towards the used truck market. And the new truck market, while it is not declining, it is not growing as well. So it's been more stable. The way we see it, even for trucks, I think starting late 3Q, 4Q, the base starts to get favorable. So we could start to see some growth. And then going into next year, we could see a slightly better outcome. As far as buses and EVs are concerned, definitely this is a focus, of the government. The new scheme which has replaced FAME is also talking a lot about it. And I think the mainstream companies are also getting into it in a big manner. I think the payment security mechanism also helps. And that will definitely play a big part in increasing electrification of buses, which is still, quite low in India. LCV and EVs in LCV, I think that will also take off, but we also need to remember that CNG is also a play in LCVs as it is in 3-wheelers. And both CNG and EV are both cleaner fuels and are good from a total cost of operation. So I think both of them will have a play going forward.
I mean, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV Profit.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.